This presentation was produced and funded in whole with federal funds from the U.S. Department of Education under contract number GS 10F0112J with the American Institute for Research. Karen Olympia serves as the contracting officer's representative. The content of this presentation does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the U.S. Department of Education, nor does the mention of trade names, commercial products, or organizations imply endorsement of the U.S. government. With that being said, I will hand it over to our moderator, Marcella.
Great. Thank you so much, Long. And thank you to all of you for joining us from so many states. It's wonderful to see all the state names as they scroll by. And I'm excited to have so much representation from so many states. Today's webinar is serving all adult learners and staff by ensuring full inclusion of individuals with disabilities. It is part of our Links Universal TA webinar series. And I did want to note, as a reminder, today's webinar will run from 3 p.m. to 4:15 p.m. So it is a 75-minute webinar. And that's if you're on the East Coast. For those of you on the West Coast, it's from 12 p.m. to 1:15 p.m. So I hope that you'll be able to stick with us our entire time together. I want to tell you a little bit of background, just as a reminder. I know many of you have been with us before, but our Universal TA webinars, we call this our Wednesday webinar series, and it's part of the Universal Targeted Assistance that is offered through Links to state offices of adult education. It's a monthly series on topics that matter most to the field of adult education, and it supports states in building their capacity around these important topics. All of our webinars are recorded, and they are available on the Links YouTube channel as soon as we make them 508 compliant. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce today's, sorry, 1 second. Before we do that, getting ahead of myself just because I'm so excited to introduce our speaker today, I did want to share with you that there are several resources available to you on this topic that is just of so much importance. In case you are looking for a place to start, we have our Links resource collection that is full of resources. Specifically, we have Achieving Healthier Futures One Step at a Time, communication tips for interacting with people with intellectual and or developmental disabilities. We have a universal design for learning guidelines. It's a graphic organizer. And we have a transition guide to post-secondary education employment for students and youth with disabilities. If you're looking for other ways to engage with others around these topics in our Links community group, of disabilities and equitable outcomes, there's ongoing discussions on this topic, and there are always new events on this topic as well. If you're looking for courses, we have our Links online courses, and these are always free. There are 5 Learning to Achieve courses developed through the Learning to Achieve initiative that was funded by Octave. So I hope that you'll look into that. Long shared the links to all of those. So again, with so many people on today's webinar, it's clear that there is a demand for resources and more information on this topic. So I hope you'll look into all of those that we are sharing today. Okay. And with that, oh good, I get to introduce my dear friend, Dahlia Shaywitz. Dahlia develops strategies and approaches to empower youth and adults with disabilities to create their future and lead their communities to achieve greater inclusion. She is currently at IEL, where she is the Vice President for Transition, Disability, and Employment. And IEL is the Institute for Educational Leadership. There, and in that role as Vice President, she oversees a portfolio of work that addresses the systems, change, and collaboration needed to connect people with disabilities to education and employment opportunities. An additional role that she has there since 2012 is serving as co-coordinator of IEL's DC Education Policy Fellowship Program. In this role, she coordinates a 10-month professional development program to support emerging leaders in education and related fields to acquire new perspectives and skills needed to function effectively in the increasingly complex political and changing environment of local, state, and national education. She has also supported the National Education Policy Fellowship Program Initiative in developing strategic plans, annual evaluation reports, the logic model and data review and monitoring of the national program. Dahlia has earned her master's in diplomacy from Norwich University, and she has a master's in writing from Johns Hopkins University. She is fluent in ASL and hails from a deaf family. With that, I did want to share her contact information. If you would like to reach out to her, she can be reached at shaywitzd@iel.org. The website for IEL, if you are interested in learning more about the work they do there, is iel.org. And that program that I mentioned that she's involved in, information on that is at epfp.iel.org. Sorry, Dahlia. Lots to say about you. With that, I am going to hand it over to Dahlia.
Thank you, Marcella. And I will send you a shorter bio next time because that was a lot to have to say.
Sorry about that.
In a moment, I will share my screen with everyone, but I just want to say hello and welcome. I am going to start presenting from here. And I'm also going to keep the chat open. Let's see how this works. Perfect. Give me just one moment. I want to make sure that I can also talk with folks. So, and I see you all there. Great. Thank you, Marcella, for the very warm introduction. And thank you, everyone. I have to say, I thought this would be an intimate fireside chat with about 30 people from the adult ed field. And we have probably 3 or 4 times that many, but it will hopefully still feel like an intimate conversation. At least that's my goal. In today's session, we are going to begin a conversation about to increase your awareness of disability prevalence, ableism, and disability inclusion. At the heart of what I am most passionate about, it is inclusion of people with disabilities in all spaces. That's in education, that's in workforce, that's in community. And so we'll begin the conversation, but I have a ton of resources at the end of the session that you can download the PowerPoint and grab those books. I'm even going to show you a film clip, so some hopefully multimedia things to learn from. We'll also talk about the value of disability diversity. I hope that that will be a continuation of a conversation that you all have been having. I know that you've been starting some conversations on links about equity and inclusion and racial justice. I think this is part of that larger conversation that we're having as a society. We'll also share some perspectives on building greater disability inclusion and identify strategies to create an inclusive adult ed program. We're not going to create it here in an hour and 15 minutes, but we'll start the conversation. I'm very happy to be here with you all to do that. Some of you may not be aware, but there was some pre-workshop reading. If you did not complete any pre-workshop reading, don't worry. The links to these documents will be in the chat and they'll be at the end of the PowerPoint. I just want you to know that I'll be referring to these two. In particular, the first one, evaluating the accessibility of American Job Centers for people with disabilities. I'll talk more about that, but I think it's a really terrific potential framework for adult education programs at the state and local level that might like to evaluate how well you're doing in terms of accessibility for your learners and your staff. So that title of this session was very intentional. A lot of times when we talk about disability, we talk about how do we serve the adult learner. And here we're talking about how do we include the adult learner beyond academics. But you also have staff, you have adult educators, you have adult administrators, you have staff at the state level, you yourselves, your boss, your colleague, people with disabilities throughout the workforce. And so I want to make sure that we're including everyone in this conversation. So we're going to begin by what I call defining disability, and we're going to do this together. So there's some people on the line that I've met before. I want to assure everyone I am not an overt sharer, but I am going to share some personal stories because I want to sort of ground our conversation when we're talking about disability. I have a colleague with a disability who said, disability is very personal. And I thought, it is very personal. It's also very political, and it's a systemic issue. And we're going to talk about all of those things today. So I want to begin with an activity. And I'd like you to name at least 5 people you know with a disability. I want you to write it down, or you can type it if you're a digital native and you have your tool in front of you. Pen and paper usually works for me. Name 5 people that you know who have a disability. And as you're doing that, I just want to share a little about myself. I'm actually going to talk about my mother. My mother was a secretary for nearly 40 years. She worked at Gallaudet University, which is a university in Washington, D.C. It is the one university in the world that serves deaf undergraduates and graduates. She was actually very lucky to get the job, and this is my connection to adult ed. She received very limited schooling. She went to the Florida State School for the Deaf and Blind. At the time she was in school, they did not allow children to sign in classrooms. So she had to, without any hearing, somehow understand what her teachers were saying and learn to lip read a little, but really didn't get a great education. She managed to get to Gallaudet, and there she actually, she completed college, but had to continue to take English writing classes into her 40s to increase her language skills. So if there's any ESL instructors in the audience or administrators, she was a second language learner because American Sign Language was her first language. It is also my first language. And I wanted to talk a little bit about my mom because I want to talk about her as the whole person, where the disability was a big factor in her life, but not the only factor in her life. So I'm going to pause there and ask folks to mention in the chat, are the people that you listed, are they mostly from your family? Are they mostly friends? Like, what part of your network are the people with disabilities from? And I see Rachel's already written down in the family, right? Mostly family. Family. Family and students. Yeah. A lot of people mentioning family, some friends. Yeah, so we all know people with disabilities. The question that always comes to mind is, if we all know people with disabilities and we don't think of family members, I don't think of my mom as being deaf, I think of my mom as my mom, and she's deaf and she's blonde. And she likes to travel, right? So she's a whole person to me. But the minute we start talking about a student with a disability or hiring a person with a disability, somehow the disability becomes the first thing we think about, the first thing we consider or see. And it's just interesting how that shifts for us in our minds, for many of us, maybe not all of us. So I'd like you to name 5 more people that you know. 5 more people. And as you do that, I'm going to talk a little bit more about my family. I have a cousin who lives in Chicago. He has cerebral palsy. He has an aide who assists him with daily living activities. He also has a law degree. He works for the government. I would say he's very fortunate because he had a lot of family means to support him through school. He had a lot of advantages, and I consider him to have a lot of advantages in life. I also have cousins with Parkinson's disease. So they worked, they're older, they're my dad's cousins, but they worked as a lawyer. One worked as a human services provider in St. Louis. So in my family, we have folks with deafness, cerebral palsy, Parkinson's, autism spectrum disorders, other developmental challenges, severe depression, learning disabilities, Alzheimer's, breast cancer, severe food allergies, asthma. There are also people with disabilities that I don't know about. And that is very normal, right? Everybody knows someone with a disability, whether it's a family member or a colleague or a friend. So as you're going through your list of now 10 or more people that you know with a disability, just make a quick note. Are they visible disabilities? Or are they invisible disabilities? And I would like to ask folks in the chat if they would mention to me, I'd like to know what's the difference between knowing someone with a disability and including someone with a disability. Another way to think about that is, what does it mean to be inclusive of people with disabilities in your networks? Removing barriers, yeah. What are some differences between knowing people and including them? Inclusion is a step further than just being aware, actively asking them to join or getting their perspectives. I love that. Considering various needs, right? Accommodating them, going outside the box, bringing opportunities and equity. Some of you may know I used to work at AIR, which is why I'm so in love with AIR and my old friends there. And the head of our special education group had a big conference. She brought together all these folks from the special ed world. And I asked these researchers and experts if the students that they know in special education are included. And to a person, they all agreed that their students were receiving special education services. They were receiving academic supports and accommodations, but they were not being included. There is a difference between providing an accommodation, making things accessible, which is bare minimum compliance, and then actually including people and making sure that they are included interpersonally, systematically. And so we're going to dig a little more into that as we go further. Thank you for your comments. I wanted to share this slide because when I say invisible disability, sometimes people aren't sure what I mean. Some of you have noted invisible or visible. There's a lot of disabilities that are invisible. There was a study done a few years ago, and I have notes on my other slides, not this one, but so I can't remember the reference, but I can share it with you all after the fact. 30% of people in the workforce have in the white collar workforce have a disability. 30% of people in white collar jobs have a disability. Only 3% of them share that they have a disability. The vast majority of people with disabilities do not share that they have a disability if it's invisible. And there are three main reasons why. One, they're worried about promotion. They're afraid that they'll be considered less than or not as good a worker. They're concerned about harassment and being left out. And then they're concerned about even being hired in the first place, right? So they don't want to be labeled. They don't want to deal with stigma. So they don't share that they have a disability. What that tells me is that 30% of the workforce are not bringing their authentic selves to the workplace. And therefore, we are not benefiting from all the people with disabilities and everything they can bring in terms of perspective to the workforce. So reflections. What were your ahas? I'm not going to ask the questions on the screen. I want to ask you, what were your ahas when you look back at the list of 10 or more people that you identified on your list? Any surprises for you? That most have an invisible disability, yeah. And David's asking what accommodations can be made of some of the, for people with an invisible disability. That is an individual question. Even within a disability category, a disability type, a person with a disability may have very different needs. I think the key is making it your organization or classroom a safe space for people to share that they have a disability, to know the steps and processes for asking for an accommodation, and then being able to you having the knowledge to direct them in the right way to get the accommodation that they need. I love what Camara, I'm sorry, I'm going to say your name wrong. It's easier to make a 10 than you thought. Yeah, we all know a lot of people with disabilities. We just don't think about them as being a person with a disability. We think about them and the disability separate. Yeah, allergies. If someone has a very severe allergy that prevents them from being able to engage in certain life activities, it can be considered a disability. Yeah. Great comments. Thank you. I'm going to keep going, but thank you. This is exactly the kind of thinking I was hoping we'd do together. I'm going to pause in the agenda and take a look at disability data for two reasons. One, I worked on the National Reporting System for Adult Education for 17 or 19 years, so I could not let an opportunity to share data with the adult ed field pass by, and also because I think it's going to give us some context for the conversation we're having. The CDC had a report in 2019, January 2019. 1 out of every 4 people in the United States self-reports having a disability. 1 out of every 4 people, 25, almost 26%. By comparison, 10% of the general population is left-handed. 17% of people in the US have blue eyes, but 1 out of every 4. It's a tremendous number. And I made the point of saying self-reported. There's something called there's no NRS data to pull on this demographic to take a look at how many learners you have with disabilities, but there's something called the Washington Group questions. There's 6 questions. All the national surveys, Census Bureau, National Health Service, all of these national agencies, when they do their surveys, have all agreed on these 6 questions, but they are self-reported questions. So of course, there's some variability in the accuracy of the data, depending on how you define disability. But at the state level, you may be able to ask those questions. And we'll talk a little bit about that soon. More than 21 million working age adults have a disability. We're going to talk a little bit about the disproportionate number of people with disabilities who are not even in the workforce at all. Now, unlike almost any other demographic, disability is a category that all of us can join at any time. People may be born with a disability, or they may acquire one over time. And eventually, if you look at that bottom part of the chart, 80 and over, if we all live long enough, we will most likely have at least one, if not multiple, disabilities. So there's a self-interest in being accommodating as well, to be inclusive of everyone. The next slide simply shares a breakdown by disability type. These are the types that are in those Washington Group questions. Hearing difficulty, ambulatory difficulty, vision difficulty, self-care difficulty, cognitive difficulty, and independent living difficulty. I think what's important to know is that we all have, when I say to you, oh, there's someone coming over, this person has a disability, your mind automatically goes to 1 or 2 specific categories. Usually it's ambulatory, sometimes it's intellectual or cognitive. But in fact, the largest category for disability type is in cognitive. And that also includes things like mental health. And we know with COVID, the pandemic, all the racial reckoning that the United States is going through right now, there's a lot on our minds. And there's a lot of people who are suffering. That may not be a long-term disability, but more and more people who have become sick from COVID are entering the disability population. Again, it's a category we can all join at any time. And here's the breakdown by race. It's interesting to note that starting in K-12, the highest prevalence of disability rates is in the population of American Indian and Alaska Native children. African-American boys tend to be over-diagnosed as having a disability and yet under-resourced in terms of the services that they need to support them. Those proportions stay pretty consistent as we age. I brought out this data point because I thought, every single state except the district and the District of Columbia and the territories. Every state has a rural and somewhat metropolitan area. I thought it would be interesting for you to know that in your parts of your state that are more rural, there is a higher prevalence of disability along with a lower rate of employment. So now we're starting to look at some additional challenges around poverty. And this slide really captures at the heart of it, people with disabilities are less likely to graduate high school. They are therefore less likely to complete college. And I mean enter, make it through the entire thing and graduate. And the gap between college completers with and without disabilities is 23%. Employment rates, 38.9%. That's an old data point. I think it's lower. People with disabilities, this is the employment rate, 40%. Only, they're less than, gosh, I want to say the numbers around 80% of people with disabilities are not in the workforce at all. Because they get discouraged when they're young. They don't have opportunities when they're young. They get discouraged as young adults, and then they give up. They're considered discouraged workers. And sometimes they become disabled while they're at work and exit the workforce. That is about a 40% gap between people with and without disabilities. Therefore, it makes sense people with disabilities earn less. More than twice as many people with disabilities live in poverty. And that's a two-way street. People with disabilities are more likely to be in poverty, and people in poverty are more likely to have disabilities. So there's a bit of data I threw at you, but I want to just to set the stage for coming back to talking about disability. Now we're going to define disability in the formal definition, right? Because we've been talking about it quite a bit. Disability, I'm going to read this to you because it's super important to understand this definition, which is not a medical definition of disability. Disability is defined as systemic barriers, negative attitudes, and exclusion by society, purposely or inadvertently, as contributory factors in disabling people. In other words, and these are my words, the problem is not inside you, it's in how society restricts and excludes you. So some people had mentioned different types of visible and invisible disabilities. When a disability gets to a point where it prevents someone from completing a task, from participating in life situations, or if there are body function or body structure impairments, that is considered a disability. But the problem is not that the person has a disability. The problem is that either we're bringing stigma to the relationship, or we are putting up barriers for that person to fully engage. So let's talk a little bit about the reverse of inclusion, which is ableism. Ableism is discrimination and prejudice against people with disabilities. There are a lot of people who assume that a person with a disability is inferior or less than a person without a disability. These people are not bad people, they mean well, but they have been raised with the thinking that people with disabilities just can't, right? I work with a woman, she's a colleague, she works for a government agency, she's a legal advisor, she's a mom, her son, everyone should have a son like this. Kitty's so wonderful and kind and generous and sweet. And she and I were meeting a couple of years ago, and she said, you know, Dahlia, I was just at the grocery store and this woman came up to me and said, oh, it's so nice that you're out. And the woman meant to be kind. She meant to say, oh, it's so nice that you in a wheelchair with some limited mobility are able to be outside and engaging in the public. And it was really offensive to this person, right? Because she's a mom and she's a career woman. And the disability was sort of not the point. But again, it's how do we keep checking ourselves that when we see a person with a disability, remember the disability is just one characteristic. It is not the whole of the person. And there's so little that we know about a person just by their disability. So I talked a little bit about the interpersonal ableism, right? That what I shared was really expressing a prejudice against and about people with disabilities. But ableism is also systematic. It's when we design not just buildings, but policies practices that are not considering people with different kinds of disabilities and how to ensure that everyone has access, that everyone can feel included. And so I wanted to share a little bit of research about ableism. First, University of Michigan, some implicit bias data. By the way, there is an implicit bias test. I hope all of you have heard about it. I think it's through Harvard. You can do, I checked all my biases and with disability, less biased. But we all carry biases unless you were born after the ADA was signed. And we'll talk a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act. Kids with disabilities were not included in my classroom. I didn't see as many people with disabilities at college. I don't know if I've ever had a boss with a disability, right? It's a very different world that I grew up in than the world that we are living in now, that young people are coming up in. What research has shown is that over time and with age, people become less favorable to people with disabilities. However, people who have contact with people with disabilities have a lower prejudice. And I included the next study from the UK, even though it's a bit old, 2014, because I think it's still pretty relevant. 36% of people in that study believe that people with disabilities are less productive. So I'm an anti-capitalist, which I'm saying even though we're on a government-funded webinar. I believe that the quality of the work is more important than the number of widgets that are produced. And so I have had colleagues with disabilities who have said, I have this disability and I need this, I need more time. I need someone to take notes for me because I can't take notes. I need to see things visually, or I need to hear things, or I need time to process. Those are easy accommodations to make. Sometimes people need a screen reader, or they need to have their desk put in a different position, or they need to be in a room that's quiet because maybe they have a cochlear implant and so they need no background noise when they're working. These are the kinds of things that can help people do their job. But this perception that a third of people share that people with disabilities are less productive keeps people with disabilities from getting jobs and keeps them from being promoted. So ableism and bias against people with disabilities has really profound implications. I'm going to check the chat. I see it's been busy. Yes, the slides will be shared with you. Thanks for asking, Sarah. Rachel says, what can we do for our students in ABE? I don't know if I have an answer to your specific question. Maybe some other folks on the conversation do, but we are going to talk a little bit about how we can be more inclusive in our programs for learners. I do want to mention, so not all cultures view disability as non-normative. While it's not true of all Native American cultures, many remain inclusive of differences within the human condition. And they recognize that disability is just one part of an individual's existence, not the defining element. Hopefully, that's just a sum up of everything I've been saying for the last 20 minutes or so. Disability is not just personal, it is also political. Identity politics came out in the 60s and 70s for disability, and it created this collective identity. So people with disabilities can all come together and we all belong together. But there's a need for continuous political consciousness because people with disabilities keep getting left out of conversations, particularly around policy and practice. And I want to make a note about intersectionality. The very understanding of disability experience is shaped by race, gender, class, gender expression, historical moment, relationship to colonization, and more. Just hitting home, disability is one aspect of a person and not the primary aspect. So, oh, and one thing I want to say about the civil rights movement for people with disabilities, it was built upon the work that was done by the civil rights movement led by African Americans in the 50s and 60s, right? So a lot of our civic awareness raising started there. So I just wanted to recognize that we built this movement on the shoulders of greatness and hard work of others. So I'm going to have fun for a minute and a half and share this trailer with you. If you have not heard about this documentary called Crip Camp, A Disability Revolution. I'm so pleased to be the first to introduce this to you. I think Long is going to put a trailer for this in the trailer link in the chat, and I have the link to the Netflix full film at the end of these slides, but I'm going to share this with you now.
What, you want me to tell them what happened? Well, two people got crabs and they're spreading. We were all very hyper about it. And I have to go shower some people. See you later.
I wanted to be part of the world, but I didn't see anyone like me in it. I hear about a summer camp for the handicapped run by hippies. Somebody said you probably will smoke dope with the counselors, and I'm like, sign me up.
Find yourself. There I was at Woodstock.
You wouldn't be picked to be on the team back home. But at Jeanette, you had to go up the back.
Even when we were that young, we helped empower each other. It was allowing us to recognize that the status quo is not what it needed to be.
The world always wants us dead. We live with that reality.
At the time, so many kids just like me were being sent to institutions. It was just a continual struggle.
Most disabled people, like myself, are unable to use public transportation.
We needed a civil rights law of our own.
A rehabilitation program has been vetoed by the president because it was cost prohibitive.
We decided we were going to have a demonstration.
You get the call to action, to the barricades.
A small army of the handicapped have occupied this building for the past 11 days.
So many people from Camp Jeanette found their way into the building.
The FBI cut off the phones. The deaf people went, we know what to do. That's how we communicated to the people outside the building. The Black Panther Party would bring a hot meal. We were like this.
We are the strongest political force in this country.
We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. And I would appreciate it if you would stop shaking your head in agreement when I don't think you understand what we are talking about.
What we saw at that camp was that our lives could be better.
You don't demand what you believe in for yourself. You're not going to get it.
I said,
the handicapped people depicted as people.
Excuse me?
So that actually was not meant to be a promotion of Netflix, but it's a fantastic movie, and it's about an hour and a half long. And I saw this with my husband, who was raised in a different country with a different understanding of disability, not an ADA familiar country. And we watched this and I said, this was a fantastic movie. It was hilarious. And he said, funny? You thought it was funny? He was so moved. I said, I thought it was hysterical because these are the people I grew up with. I grew up in a deaf family around radical, leftist, lesbian, deaf women. That was part of my upbringing, fighting for the rights of people who are deaf, understanding that my mom and my cousins could do anything that a hearing person could do, but hear. That was the motto. So for me, this was a fantastic film. I strongly recommend it. Just based on what you saw, and I know it was only 1 minute and 20 some seconds, reactions. I see Michelle Carson said, wow. Yeah, I'm actually going to talk a little bit about the history. So thanks for that, Michelle. Oh, good. I'm so glad. Yes, it did win an Oscar. You're still hearing the video loop over my talking. So sorry. Let me move on to the next slide. And yes, I'll have a link to this at the end. And Rachel, your comment, I feel overwhelmed. I'm going to give you a little bit of concrete steps to take. They're not meant to be prescriptive, although people know me, know I like to tell people what to do. But I'd be happy to tell you what to do. But I think just some guiding points will help to figure out what steps you take. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about disability inclusion in adult ed. We're sort of moving to some of that concreteness. Speaking of history, Michelle Carson, if you take nothing away from this next slide, that is a timeline of just a few highlights of disability-related policy. Take note of the number of the date 1973. Remember those people who are protesting in the film clip we just saw? They were protesting for that legislation, for the Rehabilitation Act that would provide inroads for people with disabilities to get jobs. It was all about employment. It wasn't until 1990, the Americans with Disabilities Act, where we were actually talking about discrimination. Fast forward to today, and disability discrimination is one of the 2 or 3 highest complaints received by the Equal Opportunity Office Commission. The EOC, I think I just said that wrong. But gosh, look at 2014, Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act, WIOA. Some of you have heard of WIOA in the adult ed field. I may have been one of the very few people in the adult ed field at the time who was so excited about this legislation because what it did was it forced the Department of Labor and the Department of Education to work with the vocational rehabilitation system to make sure that adults and young people who, you know, I worked part-time jobs when I was young, but young people with disabilities often don't get those opportunities. How do we make sure young people get those opportunities so they are transitioning to work just like their peers without disabilities? So for me, WIOA was great, not perfect. I know there were some burdens on data, but it was a great opportunity to keep bringing the focus back to people with disabilities and inclusion. So that's just a quick timeline, hardly comprehensive, but just a quick look. On this slide, I really just want to focus on the right side, which is the new paradigm. We define disability as a social environmental issue. It is not a problem. It is not a medical problem, even if there is a medical condition that causes an impairment that is temporary or permanent. The issue is not the disability. The issue is how do we provide access and accommodations and equity. And to do that, we need a new paradigm for thinking about how we address disability. And that means identifying barriers, removing those barriers, and then creating access. And it could be through accommodations, it could be through inclusive learning environments. There are a lot of different ways that we know of now and ways that we can create. And that means the role of a person with a disability is no longer that object of intervention or pity. It is a person who is a full-fledged community member participating in the cultural discourse. Importantly, people with disabilities need to be empowered to make decisions for themselves. And that goes back to an earlier comment. Someone had asked, you know, how do I make sure someone has an accommodation that's right for them? You ask them, do you need an accommodation? If so, what accommodation? And then I will share with you some resources of different free, public, federally funded agencies that can help you access those resources. In terms of cost, sometimes that seems like a barrier and it needn't be. So this is a quote from a young woman I spoke to about a year or so ago. I'll just read it for those folks who might not have access to the slides and called in. I would say, I'm reading the quote. I would say the biggest barrier for me going through college was ableism from professors. Much of it was subconscious ableism, like forgetting VHS tapes, uses class material, don't have captions, says Kirsten Hernandez, a graduate student at California State University, Long Beach. While it was addressed as soon as I brought it to their attention, some of it was willful and repeated ignorance. One professor I had in my senior year of undergrad told us on the first day of class that she wouldn't allow ASL interpreters or cart providers in her class because she was distracted by them, which, yes, is very illegal. So this is a common experience of a student with a disability having to bring it to a professor's attention over and over again. So I'd like to ask you all, when you're thinking about inclusive adult education, what would that look like? What kind of resources would be available? What would you need to make sure you have an inclusive adult education experience for your learners?
You mean inclusive in the classroom with other students that don't have a disability?
Could be.
Well, it would definitely have to be some differentiation in teaching.
Absolutely, yeah.
So you would definitely have to include that to make it. That's the only thing I can think of, especially in the differentiation in teaching.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for adding that. Some folks on the chat are adding things like accessible resources, flexibility. I think that's really important for students. This young woman, from her quote, she was saying, I need this accommodation. You can give me interpreter, you can give me cart, you can make sure things are captioned, like, well, I'll work with you, but I need something, right? It's not a one size fits all answer. And different people with different kinds of hearing loss will have different kinds of accommodation needs. So it's definitely pretty individual. Time to complete tasks, yes. I have a sibling with severe learning disabilities, and she needed a lot of extra time to complete her tasks in school. Accommodations translated into different languages. Thank you for reminding us that the ELL population includes people with disabilities. Individualized instruction, access to assistive technology. A lot of great comments on the chat, and you're spot on. I'm going to share, remember I mentioned at the beginning that I'd referenced the evaluation of accessibility at the American Job Centers. This is a report that came out in 2017. So you know that it's research. So it started in 2012. They did the research for a few years. It probably took them a year to get it published, and then through all the bureaucracy. So it's a little dated, but I reference it because I think it is a fantastic framework for adult education. Because what they did was they sort of put accessibility issues into three major categories. The first, physical accessibility. So most of us know what that is, ramp, providing accessible physical space that's usable by people with disabilities. There's also a communications aspect. So if someone comes into your adult ed program and they say, I want to take classes, given the disability they have, are you able to communicate? Are they getting information that's communicated to them in a way that they can understand it, whether it's plain language, whether it's having someone, something in Braille, large print, having an interpreter, et cetera. And then there's programmatic accessibility. So to what extent do people with disabilities have access to the entirety of what you're offering? And so they evaluated American Job Centers. There are something like 2,500 American Job Centers across the country. I believe there's a lot more adult ed centers across the country, and someone on this list must know the answer to that question. But here's the results on the slide. What they found in this evaluation was, I think, really fascinating. Physical access. 92% of one-stop centers are physically accessible. 70% of them, that's a pretty high number, were communications accessible. Someone comes in the door or calls or teletypes and they are able to get their communications met. Programmatic, only 44% of American Job Centers had inclusive programming that really made sure that anyone who came in with a disability had access to the programs they were offering. Overall, the number's 37%. And the reason that's so low is because American Job Centers, they weren't all good at all three things. Majority of them had physical access, but that doesn't mean they necessarily had the other categories as well. But if you dig deeper into the data, which is why I like this information, only half of those 92% that were physically accessible were excellent only half of them were excelling beyond compliance. 44% of them were accessible, but 48% of them were exemplary. So 48% were exemplary. When it comes to communications access, only 6% were exemplary. And the rest of that 70%, they were accessible, but not exemplary. There's a difference. We started out talking about what does inclusion look like. Inclusion is not compliance. Inclusion is full access. So a compliant adult education program is going to have an access ramp for someone with a wheelchair, and it may go into the back part of the building. An excellent physically accessible building would have multiple access points so that a person in a wheelchair would not have to go all the way around the building in order to find a ramp, would have more than one bathroom in the building if there's multiple floors that are handicap accessible. So we really are aiming for excellence. And the other reason why I think this is interesting for the adult ed community to pay attention to is that adult education programs live in all kinds of physical structures. I would hazard the guess that if we did the same evaluation of the adult education system, we'd see less physical accessibility. We may see the same amount of communication. I actually think you'd have stronger programmatic accessibility, but that's because I'm biased in favor of the adult ed system, particularly the ESL programs, who I think they just know how to teach. So, but I think this is a good sort of framework if you wanted to take a look at your programs at the state or local level to say, how are we doing? And this evaluation report is available. I am sure they include their tools and measures, which is something you could borrow and do your own self-audit. Someone had asked, what do we do? What can we do? These are some things you can do right now. As soon as this webinar is over, go back to your office and identify what policies, procedures, and resources do you have in place. Are they state level? Are they local level? How do they guide your accessibility accommodations and resources? Identify partners at the state and local level. I will list a few resources for you. There are plenty of resources to help you understand what you need to do, find cost-effective accommodations. There's a lot of folks who want to partner with adult ed, and not just because WIOA requires it. So there's a lot of people out there that want to partner with you. Training needs to be ongoing. Think about this session. We're going to talk for 75 minutes. That is hardly sufficient to communicate, for me to communicate to you and for you to then communicate to others about what the values are, but it's the beginning of a conversation. But training should be ongoing, including about disability history. That's really important for folks to know about. Sometimes I take it for granted because I grew up with it, and I forget there are people who didn't know about the Gallaudet uprising in the 1980s and things like that. And then what you can do immediately, champion inclusion that's intersectional, that recognizes the whole person. Be that champion in your organization to always bring inclusion into the conversation when you're talking about policies and practices and things. What you can do now for adult learners, I checked with there are ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA resource centers. They're regional, they're across the country, they're federally funded. They are funded to answer your questions about rights and responsibilities for adult learners, for adult education staff. I contacted one of the ADA centers and asked them some questions. They got back to me within 24 hours with the answers and encouraging me to ask more questions. You can ask your adult learners when at intake, will you require an accommodation? You can't ask them if they have a disability. You can ask them if they require an accommodation, but then be ready to provide them with a list of accommodations that you can offer. Also, share information about the ADA, particularly for adult learners who are not from the United States, didn't grow up here, but even those who do grow up here don't always know what their rights are under the ADA and the law. You can reduce stigma. Remember, that's one of the biggest fears people have about sharing that they have a disability and disclosing. It's because they're worried about stigma. The more you talk openly about disability inclusion, the more you reduce the stigma. And then partner with state and local agencies that already provide services to people with disabilities of all ages. They can support you to support your learners. And similarly for adult education staff, your adult educators, your local program staff, your state program staff, you can ask your workforce through some sort of administrative survey. It can be anonymous. You can ask how many people have a disability, what type of disability. Anonymous allows them to self-disclose without that fear of stigma. You can also encourage people with disabilities to apply for jobs. I put on our job application that we post, people with disabilities strongly encouraged to apply. And I actually had an intern a few years ago, and she said, you know, when I was recovering from breast cancer treatment, a friend of mine said to me, gosh, you must be really worried about getting a job. She said, well, what do you mean? And her friend said, well, but you have a disability now and people might not want to hire you. And so when she saw that on the job application, she applied, even though it was a really entry-level data entry internship, because she just wanted to feel that she was in a place where she felt welcome. And actually in recovering from the treatment for breast cancer, it affected her cognitive ability. And so she was trying to re-enter the workforce and finish up her PhD thesis. So having this job allowed her to do some very like rote kind of it didn't require a lot of complex thinking for her to do that internship. So it was a nice way for her to come back into the workforce, which was pretty cool. You need a central budget to provide accommodations for your staff. If you do nothing else, create a central budget for accommodations for your staff with a clear policy and process for staff to request accommodations. It should not be the responsibility of a teacher or a manager to pull it out of their budget to provide an accommodation for a worker or a learner. It should be part of the policy, part of what you do, and a whole separate budget line item to provide accommodations. And of course, you can continue to promote people with disabilities into leadership positions. Then they become role models for others, and provide training, ongoing and frequent training. So what's your plan? On the NRS project, which I mentioned I worked on for many years, we always had an action plan. So I felt moved to provide you with an action plan, which you can create on your own. Set your goals, figure out what steps you need to take to reach those goals, figure out what resources you need and which resources you already have. Who will be responsible? Who's going to be your champion and make sure this keeps happening, keeps going? What's your time frame and how will you measure success? So there's a handout also that was shared. And I have some homework here, but I actually just want to stop here because I feel like this really repeats what I've just said. And the next slide does as well. So before I do a little wrap up, I just wanted to see what comments or questions you might have for me. And I love that people have been chatting on the chat. That's fantastic. I love that everyone's sharing access. Oh, and Cheryl Hart, thank you for joining the webinar. Universal Design for Learning comes from, is learning supports. That's super important for your adult learner. Universal Design came out of the architecture field. Many of you probably already know that. So I always like to use the phrase universal design because it's broader than just learning, and it helps us to take a step back and focus on how do we create access for everyone, for the learners, the educators, the staff, everyone.
I have a question. I did look on the chat, and that's good to know Well, I actually have a sister that has disabilities. She has mild to moderate retardation and schizophrenia. She graduated from high school with, I guess she was in special ed classes. But she reads really well. She can follow some instruction, like, you know, she can follow a recipe. She knows what a teaspoon, tablespoon, cup, 1/4 cup is. But I do know she knows how to pronounce and enunciate, but not so much as she's understanding everything that she's reading. However, this year I'm teaching low-level adult learners. Some of them don't even have the phonics. You know, that's where I'm like, what type of disability is that? Where they just did not get a good education in elementary school, where they don't have phonics, sounding out. So I just wonder if that's deep. I mean, some of it, okay, yeah, you know that the brain could be brain injuries, but all of them don't have brain injuries.
Yeah, so I don't.
They'll tell you I was dyslexic, or they'll tell you, some of them will, when they was in school, what problems they were having.
Yeah, I think it's come up in the chat also that we need good assessments for adult learners. What's interesting is we have some programs at my organization working with youth, so 12 to 17 and also 16 to 25. A lot of times these young people have disabilities and they're told they have a disability in school, but they don't know what disability is. They don't understand what it means, and they don't always know what to do with it. And because of the stigma attached to it,
that's
go to college, they leave high school. As soon as you turn 18 and you're out of high school, you don't carry a little card around that says I was labeled as this disability in K-12. So a lot of times folks will go into the workforce or higher education without the skills to advocate for themselves, to say, this is what I need, this is what I want. I'm a person with a disability. The issue is not me. The issue is I need this accommodation. So self-advocacy, I think, is really important. Right. I believe, I hope I'm getting this right, every state and DC has a version of partners in policymaking. I know it's in Minnesota because it came out of Minnesota in the 1980s. Partners in policymaking for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And the DC program is actually run by one of my colleagues, and it includes people with developmental disabilities and family members and advocates. So it's a little bit different from partners in policymaking. It's about advocacy, not just self-advocacy, which is so important. It's also about understanding policy and becoming policy influencers. And we have graduates with a whole range of disabilities, and some of them have gone on to be members of the Developmental Disabilities Council of DC. They have become advocates in their organizations. If they are working, they have joined boards. They've started their own small businesses to advocate for themselves or their family members. So I think self-advocacy is really key for someone to be able to ask for what they need, so that you are not left guessing what they need.
Okay, yeah, that's important too. And I guess you have to build that rapport with the students for them to open up to you about what their needs are, what they.
Yeah, gosh, wouldn't it be great if there was adult ed curriculum for AB and ESL students that talk about a couple weeks of talking about disability history in the United States, global disability numbers, how disability is understood, advocacy, rights and responsibilities. That'd be a great, maybe Octave can put together a curriculum for the field.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michelle.
You're welcome.
I appreciate also that you've been on video, so I feel like I'm talking to someone. That's really nice. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I do with my students, especially when we go back, starting off, I go through the, the Great Depression and how a lot of the disability with FDR came about, helping people that were disabled and going through the ADA and the timeline. So I do that also in my classroom, so they'll know what, how this came about in the United States.
That's excellent. Oh, and I forgot to mention, Monday was the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was born on July 26th, thanks to people like Judy Heumann, who you saw in that video. Judy Heumann, who lives right up the street in Washington, D.C., has published her book called Being Human. I have to enunciate clearly. And she has a podcast series interviewing folks from all over the world about disability issues. So I'm going to bring us on. Continue on. I'm going to take just a moment to talk about my organization, and then I'm going to share a bunch of resources. So I'm with the Institute for Educational Leadership, which has been around since 1964. We're a national nonprofit, and at the core of what we do is leadership development to support communities to achieve racial justice, disability inclusion, economic justice, and health. So we've been doing this for 57 years. The Education Policy Fellowship Program that I oversee in the DC area is also 57 years old. You may have been hearing in the administration a lot of funding for community schools. IEL leads the Coalition for Community Schools and has done for the last 20 years. A lot of those community schools, it's about the kids, but it's also about their families and communities. Those parents, there's a school in New Mexico that my colleague was telling me about. He said something like 400 of the parents are in ESL classes in Arizona. New Mexico. They provide transportation, childcare, a great potential partner for adult ed. My colleagues have also led the Family and Community Engagement Network for 20 years. And they just had a big conference in June, and I got to be tech host. And while I was tech host, I picked a session that was led by adult educators from Minnesota and an adult learner from East Africa. And they were talking about how to help adult learners from other countries learn about their rights under the ADA to be able to get their children access and services. And of course, for 20 years or more, IEL has been working with young adults and young people with and without disabilities. So we work with young people who have multiple barriers, including justice involvement, homelessness, foster care. And of course, my passion is all around disability inclusion in all spaces, as I mentioned. So I work a lot in leadership development and disability inclusion in the workforce and now in adult ed. So thank you all for having me here to speak with you all. I mentioned resources. There are multiple slides. You'll get these slides. The ADA National Network I mentioned. You have any questions after this webinar, contact them. It is their job to answer all your questions. Every state has a state assistive technology office. This is a state resource that you can use to get assistive technology for your learners or your staff. Inclusion at Work is a framework that you can use if you want to figure out how to improve your services, whether it's to the learner or for your workforce. And the Job Accommodations Network, they provide information. Remember, I kept mentioning training. You need to do training over and over. Jan will give you training for free in support of an inclusive workforce. I am providing links in the slides to a bunch of guides and reports, including some that we've developed at IEL, but others as well that I have found helpful. The World Health Organization does a report on disability, and it is 400 pages long and it's in tiny font and I can't read it. But then they also do a 30-page with lots of pictures in plain language that is fantastic, perfect for you to share with your adult learners. I included the link to Crip Camp and the Harvard Implicit Bias Test, which I mentioned. You can do that for fun. You can share your results with your colleagues if it's not too embarrassing. And more articles and web pages and books. This is a book I like. I like theoretical books, so I found that interesting. If you don't like theory, it might not be the right book for you, but there's lots of other articles here too. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dahlia. That was an incredible session.
Thank you. Are you going to send us, email us the slides?
Those, they will not be emailed out. They will be available when the recording becomes available. So please be on the lookout for that. As I said earlier, it'll be available on our YouTube channel. If you would like to get in touch with Dahlia, again, her email address is, and I'll spell it out this time, SHAEWITD@IEL.org. And we wanted to check in with you since there is so much interest on this topic. Long, if you can pull up our polls, we wanted to find out, for those of you who are in the state office, would you be interested in participating in targeted technical assistance on serving all adult learners by ensuring full inclusion of individuals with disabilities? If you can take a moment to respond to that poll. Through links, we're also planning to provide targeted technical assistance on teacher induction. So that's bringing new teachers into the profession, helping them learn the basics, helping them understand the teacher competencies as well. If you could just let us know yes, maybe, or not at this time. Again, that's for those of you who are at the state office. It'll help us plan the technical assistance that we will be providing.
And could you give me the name of that movie? Because I kind of came a little late today.
Yeah, so that is included. The link for that as well is included in that handout that was posted in the chat.
And it's called CRIP Camp.
CRIP.
CRIP-CAMP. I just, one last thing I want to say. There's a current interest in using a word like phrase like differently abled instead of disabled, because disabled has become a bad word in some people's minds. Before that, it was handicap. Before that, it was CRIP. It was all these other words that are now considered bad words.
Right.
I'm of the mindset, own the word. Disabled is not a negative word to me. It's very empowering for me because it helps me identify myself. So different people with disabilities have different opinions. Whatever someone chooses, I respect that, and I use the phrase or term that they prefer.
Great. Thanks so much, Dahlia. And on the next, since we're out of time, I just want to make sure on the next slide, we do share with you, if you can move ahead to the next one, Dahlia. We have our next month's webinar is going to be on links and review. We're going to be sharing with you on August 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific time. Again, it'll be a 75-minute webinar on what Links has been doing, what we've been doing, share with you all of our highlights, and Long shared with us in the chat the link to register for that. If you have any specific questions on that you want us to make sure to answer, please share those. And if not, I want to thank all of you again for joining us. Dahlia, it's always great to chat with you and to hear everything you have to share. This one, I want to say you outdid yourself. I don't want to say that you set the bar really high for the next time, but I think you did. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dahlia, for your time.
Yeah, well, I needed this to get on. I'm going to go watch the movie. That is on Netflix, right?
Sure is.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dahlia. Thank you, Marcella. Thank you, Long. Another great webinar. Thank you very much.
As almost everyone is out, so let me stop the recording actually.